There has been a genuine debate since the Great Recession started in 2007, 2008, particularly the financial crisis of 2008. There are really two narratives explaining what happened. One is more radical than the other. The more radical narrative says that this was the culmination of imbalances, not just within the United States between capital and labor, but within the world economy, between countries running perpetual export surpluses like China and countries like the United States and also Britain and Spain running perpetual trade deficits that had to be financed by debt, and that all of this was building up out of kilter over 30 or 40 years, really from the late 70s, from Carter and Reagan onwards. And it's essentially an industrial system that crashed. And the financial crisis was just part of it. And we now need to rebuild a modern world economy on different foundations rather than simply going back to the old one. That's the radical interpretation in the sense of not of being left-wing or right-wing, but of going to the root, the original etymology of radical. The more predominant and much more optimistic interpretation is that there was nothing wrong with the system in the US or the world, or the form that globalization took in the 90s, or the form that deregulation took after the 1970s. All of that was fine, all of that was good. Mistakes were made by central banks, perhaps by the Federal Reserve. There might have been a little more regulation of the banking community. And if you accept this interpretation, then you don't really have to rethink the system. There was no systemic failure, there was simply a failure of policy. And indeed, there were no crimes committed because the policymakers were good, well-meaning people. They were committed errors of the mind, not of the heart. And if you just have Dodd-Frank here and perhaps you break up some banks there or change asset allocation rules, in that case, we can go back to this booming economy of the Reagan and Clinton eras. And ironically, most of the mainstream left and the mainstream right have agreed with this second, more optimistic opinion. For example, the Break Up the Banks movement, it may seem radical, but actually it's not addressing these fundamental issues of global imbalances and the location of production in the developing countries versus the developed world. It's simply focused on the financial sector as though it were the cause of the crisis, whereas this other systemic interpretation sees the crisis in finance as being a symptom of a deeper underlying malady, not the actual cause of the Great Recession itself. And I think until we get beyond simply thinking we can patch up this aspects of the financial system and then go back to business as usual, up until 2006, 2007, that we really won't be able to have, I won't even say a recovery because I don't like the term recovery. We need reconstruction. We need renewal, renovation, rebuilding, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's not recovery because recovery implies that you're going back to the system that existed before. In my view, that system is broken, just as the system before the Great Depression of the 1930s was permanently shattered. And the countries of the world had to create a new system during the Depression and during World War II, which then lasted up until the next crisis. So I think that's what we're looking at. But that is not where the conversation has been.